Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. You're listening to Wrestling Changed My Life.
We can endure anything and adapt and pivot and change. Wrestling gave us that ability.
I would say nothing in life has impacted me more than the things wrestling has taught me in terms of self-reflection, resilience.
Toughness. Some guys have it, some guys don't.
Adversity, 100%. How to pick myself up and be a man after I failed.
And everything that has shaped my life and where I'm at today would not be there without the values and basically the lessons I've learned through the sport of wrestling.
For me, wrestling saved my life because it allowed me to focus and channel my energy.
We're fortunate if you wrestled, because if you wrestled, natural talent helps, but it's 5% of the ingredient. It pales in comparison to heart and technique and effort.
It humbled me, taught me humility. Nothing can humble you more than wrestling. I think it's the learning to adapt, right? You learn how to adapt, you learn how to solve problems.
You know, if I look back at my time I spent wrestling, if it gave me one thing more than anything else, it's mental toughness.
Yes, indeed, ladies and gentlemen. We're here. We're live. It's Wrestling Changed My Life podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We greatly appreciate it. My guest today is Joe Heskett, one of the great talents of the 2000 era of wrestlers, and I would say of all time. Here's a couple stats for you. In college, he was 143-9. 8 of those losses came in overtime. Right? He was a 4-time All-American, 3-time finalist, national champion senior year, and then he went on to battle Joe Williams for a number of years in the 2000s and made a world team in 2007. Right after he got 5th in the world championships, he had a heart attack, and doctors came to realize that he had a rare heart defect that had realistically plagued him his whole collegiate and international career. So what he did with a bad ticker is absolutely amazing. And God, this guy is just such an inspiration. He's kind of what I call a leadership guru. He's studied it, and he owns a leadership company now. So really one of my favorite podcasts we've ever done. Please welcome Joe Heskett. But before we do, it's Fan of the Week time. And this one goes to Colin Weber, Colin_Weber4. Huge fan of the podcast and just a great supporter of wrestling all around. Thank you so much, Colin. Now, without further ado, let's take you to this episode with Joe Heskett. Joe Heskett, one of Iowa State's finest. Welcome to the podcast, man.
Brian, really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Your credentials they're a little crazy to rattle off here, but I want to do that just because I know you're a humble guy, and then we can go back to your beginnings with the sport. But, 4-time All-American. In college, you were 143-9. 8 of those losses came in overtime, which is insanity to me. And then 3-time finalist, NCAA champ, world team member. You were on the national team all throughout the 2000s, and, man, it's just an honor to chat with you. So let's go back to the beginning, man. How did your story begin, and kind of what was the impact of your grandmother?
Well, we lived in Warren, Ohio, and we had a neighbor. I was probably 6 years old, and I literally had a box of He-Man creatures. I walked down to a driveway about 2 houses down on Union Street in Warren, Ohio, and there was 2 kids playing basketball. Probably I was 6 at the time. I'd say 13 and 16. I sat down at the bottom of their driveway, started playing with my He-Man creatures by myself. They walked down and kind of treated me like a little brother. And next thing you know, they took me to wrestling practice, and that's kind of how it started. I went to the Warren YMCA, and they took me to practice multiple nights a week. And one of them actually ended up being a state runner-up in Ohio. For I believe Warren G. Harding High School, but that's how I got my wrestling start, and I just never looked back.
Man, and it must be a strong YMCA program in Ohio, because Andy Rovat also got started through the YMCA. I don't see that often, man. I don't know if it's just Ohio or if that's just 2 very unique cases.
Well, I think maybe things have changed in throughout the years as well. I don't know if it's the funding with the YMCA's, but I just believe that probably back in the 80s, there was a lot more programming with wrestling is what I would tend to guess, specifically with wrestling. But I do know, that was a great place and still is in many ways for other activities for kids. But it was an incredible place for some of us to get our start and at least get introduced to the sport.
Right. And I know you're big on not overtraining athletes and kind of understanding the fundamentals before we get into competition as kids. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But I know you were raised by your grandmother. I was raised by a single mother myself, but I did have my mom and dad around, but you were raised by your grandmother. How did that all come about, and kind of what were some of the lessons she instilled in you that you're using still to this day?
Well, my grandmother and I are extremely close. She's still around, and she's still as feisty as ever. But, I never knew my father. My mother died. Her daughter was my mother, and my mother died when I was young from drugs and alcohol. And my grandmother kind of just removed me from that situation as much as humanly possible. So, when it comes to instilling really all the key qualities to be a good human being, I mean, there was nothing but love. There was nothing but sacrifice. And I saw those things, and it was genuine. And here's a woman that really didn't have to take her grandchildren under her wings, and did so in a fashion. I even look back at the sport of wrestling, and she knew nothing about wrestling, nothing. She just knew that, she wanted me active, and she saw that I had a talent in sports, and she did whatever it took to, travel with me around the country to really feed that fuel I had to compete and to be the best. So it was, just out of sheer love, that she, supported me. And I think that was a huge part to my development of my mind mentally when it comes to how young men and women should be treated through sport, especially when it comes to, and we'll probably get into this a little bit more, but how parents interact. And what my grandmother did which was an incredible blessing, is she just, as I said earlier, she just fed the fuel. She just saw that I was good at something, and, she didn't ride my case. She wasn't hard on me. She didn't put ultimatums on me. She just supported. And it really made me love the sport of wrestling and other sports for that matter, but it made me love and focus on the sport of wrestling.
And what do you think the role of the parent should be if there's an elite athlete, and just helping them mentally as well as physically? What does that look like for you?
Take a lead athlete out of it, right? Just take a kid that wants to have fun, which is, I would imagine, every kid that does sport,
right.
Every kid in general, right? And that's where, these parents get in these microcosms. And I always tell coaches and parents, kids do not think like us. They don't have the maturity. They don't have the life experiences. At 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, a lot of these kids don't even know what competition is, right? So, as a parent, we can articulate that. We know what that looks like. We know, the hard work that needs to go in it. These kids, even my own children, and I have 3 very, very high-level athletes that happen to be very athletic children. But for me, it's still all about having fun. And then they'll find their own. So my advice to parents and coaches is it has nothing to do with being elite or not elite, because we've seen all the time. I mean, I'll use a buddy of mine, Jamil Kelly, who's a very, very good athlete, wrestled at Oklahoma State, never placed it in college as an All-American, and took, second in the Olympic Games. So it's not about, how good you are at 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. Actually, I tell my parents it's next to irrelevant. What's relevant is that developmental process and the mind and the mental and the understanding of the sport, so that they can actually use their intellect over their brawn, or, not fall back on accolades and focus more on growth and development. So that's a really key part of my leadership model.
And I'm fascinated by the mental approach in any activity that requires, really a high level of dedication. Did you get into sports psychology as a high schooler, or how did you kind of come by this passion for that?
Well, I think I actually started in sports psychology as a major in college, but I switched out. But long before that, I was always just more of a leadership guy. I was more like why people made decisions, how they made decisions, what was the significance of those decisions. I always analyzed that even as a kid. And so, I'll give a quick story. When I was being recruited out of high school, Ohio State recruited me, and I love Ohio State. I love the state of Ohio. I have a lot of loyalty to the state. I'm very proud of being from Ohio. But at the end of the day, I wrestled for Walsh Jesuit, and we were multiple national champions. And so a lot of my teammates were highly recruited athletes, and several of them went to Ohio State, and many of them, they didn't even make it past their sophomore year. So I'm a sophomore, junior in high school looking at this and analyzing this, and I'm going, why? What's the culture? What's some of the ramifications and some of the different parts and pieces that go to, making a young man or woman successful when they make that transition? And there's a lot of factors, obviously. But, to answer your question, I looked at that pretty critically as a young man. And, now I'm, be 41 years old tomorrow. And, I finished up all my doctoral classes in human development and organizational leadership. So I've looked at this not only, from a young kid and analyzing it, but I also saw it from a coaching level, a high coaching level, a high athlete level, an administrative level, and then the academic end. So I feel pretty good about at least talking with some credibility and some knowledge behind the subject of leadership and development of people.
There's no question about it. And you own your own business now. It's called H Leadership. And one of the, I'm guessing it's probably a pivotal moment in your life was when you were out at West Point. You were the head coach of the West Point wrestling team for 4 years. And I've heard you say, you talk about that's the greatest school for leadership, so to speak. And I also read that you got into some sports psychology out there, maybe even kind of combat psychology. So how did West Point add to your already foundational level of leadership and mental training, so to speak?
Well, quite honestly, there's literally probably no place on the planet better. I mean, it was for a guy like me, and it's interesting, right? Because, you look back on my college career, and I was fortunate even as a kid. I mean, I usually don't say this in interviews, but I won a national title at every level. I won a national title, made a cadet world team. I won, out at Fargo juniors. I won university nationals. I won a U.S. Open. So I had a lot of success on every stage of the sport. And the reason I share that is when you look at, as a fan, you look at these athletes, and I was one of those athletes, you just sometimes see them as an athlete. You really don't know what their interests are, especially back in the day before a lot of the social media and the coverage, like Flow and a few other mediums out there. But my point is, a lot of fans, they don't really get to know, guys like myself or anybody for that matter. And again, my passion was always the development of people. So when the West Point job opened up, for me, there was probably no better job in America for me to transition from Ohio State, where we just had placed second in the country multiple years while we were there, and to transition to be the head coach at such a fine institution. There, not only was I able to grow as a coach, but I was able to grow as a man and my leadership philosophies and the young men I worked with. I mean, just out of this world young men. Now, the funny thing is, again, people always kind of look at it and be like, oh, you get to work with the creme de la creme. Listen, at the end of the day, they're creme de la creme because they're animals, but they're also still knucklehead kids. And, just like you or I, but they make a commitment. And that whole kind of workaround, that whole experience of working with the athletes, my ORs, being a head coach, growing as a leader, understanding, we had a great sports psychology department there. It was a pretty unique experience as a whole, especially for a kind of a leadership nerd like me.
Well, I think you said it best. In the wrestling world, and no offense taken here, but some people wouldn't look at West Point as a top job. But since you were kind of on this path of leadership, even to when you went to West Virginia, it was the perfect job for you. And just being around super disciplined people, I don't know about you, but it gets me excited. It gets me fired up. I mean, what are some skills or even maybe small habits that you do to this day that you picked up while you're at West Point, whether it's from your athletes or from some of the military folks there that are the teachers at that institution?
Well, it's really, it comes down to some of the most basic things that we learn in life, right? There's a cadet honor code: a cadet shall not lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do. I mean, that's taken very, very seriously. And at the end of the day, that comes back to character. And that's what was one of the best things about West Point, was that there was it was basically a mandate on character. And you just don't get you don't get that very many places. And you can try to create cultures within a team or, within a program. But when you walk into an institution that has those types of attributes embedded into it, you're in a very special place. And that's why, as much as I love West Point, the academies in general do a tremendous job of human development. And so, when you ask what I take from it, I take those things, I take those character attributes and I live them. I try to teach them to my children. And, I'm not a perfect man. I make many mistakes, but at the end of the day, it's all about helping people.
Yeah, it is infectious too. I mean, I know we mentioned before the air, my brother-in-law, I believe it is. Sometimes I get confused with the extended families, but he went to West Point, then went on to get his MBA from Michigan. And this is a guy that could not be more buttoned up. And it's just the epitome of discipline. And every time I'm around him, I feel a little bit better about myself. So I can't imagine what it was like for you being there for 4 years. It must have been incredible.
No, it was outstanding. We had just a ton of fun, and the Office of Representatives, which anywhere between a staff sergeant and a full bird colonel, were support resources for me and the program, and just an incredible experience. But with that being said, my whole journey's been an incredible experience. Everywhere from Cal Poly to Ohio State, West Virginia, and now doing my own thing. It's all been a part of the process to mold me into the man leader that I am today. And obviously, I give great respect to my grandmother and a lot of other key people in my life and mentors that have helped get me here.
Well, and hopefully I'm able to tease out a few of those just based on the research here, because to me, your life has been really a journey to this point, because you get to Iowa State, wrestle for one of the great legends of the sport, Bobby Douglas, multiple-time Olympian. A lot of people forget that he won a national title at Arizona State. That's the only time someone in the Pac-12, to my knowledge, has won the national championship. So that's a real innovator for the sport. And you got there at the exact same time as another well-known wrestler, Kale Sanderson. What have you learned from him, and what do you think made him different? Because you've been on great teams throughout your life.
Yeah, I mean, Kale and I go way back. We were on the same, I mentioned I made the Cadet World Team back in 1994. It was me, Kale, Stephen Abbas, Mike Zadek. We were all on that World Team back in 1994 as knucklehead kids. So Kale and I go way back, and we were college teammates and roommates. And, one of the things that just separates him, we all worked hard, but I remember looking back, and Kale, there wasn't many practices that went by that he wasn't doing an extra match, right? Like after practice, he was just incredibly gifted. When he moved up weight classes, he was super savvy in how he wrestled, and he kept the motion, but there was a mental fortitude that he had that, it eclipsed 100% of the other people in the world, hence his Olympic title. So, no, he was just a special guy to go to college with. And I'll tell you this, a lot of people, and again, they don't know me, looking from the outside in, or Kale for that matter, but a lot of people would say, Joe, you had an incredible career. You were 143-9, 8 overtime losses, but as good as that was, it had to be hard sometimes, to watch Kale Sanderson kind of go undefeated, because it would have been your glory if he wasn't there. I'm saying my glory. I said, this has nothing to do with me. I went out there and I wrestled just like he was. Like he did. For me, it was incredible to be a part of that journey and to watch him do what he did. Like, I was a big, and still am, a big Kale Sanderson fan. And we competed in our own ways and those types of things. But at the end of the day, I was always unbelievably appreciative of what I was watching. And I knew there was history being made in the making. And I've always been a big Kale Sanderson fan.
Well, and the only reason I even bring it up is the fact that I heard you say when you won your national title in Albany, when you beat Matt Lackey, it's almost equally as memorable to you that he won his fourth, which really struck me, because you would think that when you won your NCAA title after getting second your sophomore and junior years, that there'd be nothing that compared to it. But I heard you say that, and I was like, man, this deserves a little bit of exploration here before we get into your own career.
Well, I mean, it was history. It's never been done, and it's going to be unbelievably hard to repeat. So, that's something that will stand out forever. And as much as my national title is important for me, that victory for Kale to win his fourth, that was something incredibly special to be a part of. But it also was incredible for the team. It was incredible for my teammate and his family. Yeah, those are once in a multiple lifetime mark right there.
No question. Now let's focus on Joe Heskett, the wrestler, a little bit. So you're a 3-time state champ in one of the toughest high school states in the country, Ohio, obviously. You go to Iowa State, a perennial top 10, top 5. Third as a freshman, second as a sophomore and junior to Pritzloff. Going into the Nationals your senior year, in the back of your mind, I'm sure you're thinking, this is my last chance, but maybe not. What was your mindset and your self-talk going into the Nationals your senior year?
At some point, you just gotta say, hey, I'm gonna give my best, and it's what it is after that. I'm as competitive as a guy as they get, but I don't overanalyze competition. I put it on there, I put it out there, and as long as I can do that, I'm happy with it. But yeah, to know that it was my last chance, to know how close I had been. I was 32 or 33-0 as a freshman going into the NCAA tournament and lost in double overtime in the quarterfinals. And, I'd been so close, losing in, overtime in the national finals my sophomore and junior year. I mean, obviously I knew it was my last shot, but whether it was my freshman year or senior year, I believed I was the best. So, and I trained to be the best. So there's not an arrogance when it comes to that type of mentality. You train to be the best. So I believed that. I kept that in mind, and I went out and tried to execute like I was the best, each and every match. And sometimes it went my way, sometimes it didn't. And fortunately, I was able to capture that crown my senior year.
Man, it must have been an incredible feeling. And I just know now how introspective you are. I mean, coming off of your junior year, like the week you get back to Ames, it's real quiet. The Nationals just happened. Were you that introspective then and saying, hey, okay, it's about each day at a time. Let's focus on the day? Or did you go through some rough periods after your junior and sophomore years?
I think there was definitely some rough periods just because it's the sport. But I always, for the most part, I always believed in myself. So, and it wasn't like I went and laid an egg. I just didn't win, at the right time, and I didn't get the job done. I mean, my junior year, that was a really, really hard loss because after my sophomore year, I was like, oh man, I can't allow this to happen again. And I put in so much time over the summer, and to make it back to the finals against Donnie, who, I have nothing but respect for. I consider him, an incredible competitor and even friend, think the world of him, but, we wanted to beat each other. And so, I was excited to wrestle him again in the finals. And not only did I lose, but I lost with seconds to go. And I had the choice on bottom if it went into overtime, so that was a major, major error on my part tactically, in a match to give up that takedown. So, you look back on that, and I was upset with myself, but it wasn't a lack of effort. It wasn't a lack of will. It wasn't a lack of heart or desire. He took advantage of a position, and that's all credit to him.
And we're talking
but
about...
to answer your...
Go ahead.
I was going to say, to answer your question, no, there was definitely hard times. I lost to Tyrone Lewis right before NCAAs my senior year in double overtime, or in overtime. It's a dual meet, and I remember talking to my grandmother on the phone, and she was like, "How you feeling? Oh my gosh, are you ready?" And I'm like, "Gram, listen, I'm going to be fine." It was probably a good time to get a loss out of my way. I didn't want to do it, but I'm going to be ready for nationals. So it's just overcoming those tough losses or untimed losses and being ready for the moment.
Man, I forget some of those names you're throwing out. It's just amazing to me how tough those weights were in the mid 2000s. Donnie Pritzloff, third at the Worlds, obviously. Tyron Lewis went to Okie State, part of those great teams. So, man, it was just stacked. And so, like, your senior year, when you're really in the zone and you're really all in on it, like, what was your day in the life like? I mean, were you one of those guys who woke up and just thought, how can I get better today? Or did you really compartmentalize it? Because people we have on here take different approaches, and I'm always just curious on kind of how you thought about it. So, like, January or February, your senior year, what's your day in the life like, and where are you at mentally?
I think I found a pretty good groove just being consistent, throughout my career. Wrestling at a place like Walsh Jesuit and fighting for national titles year in and year out as a team. I mean, that teaches you a lot, So you hear the best athletes in the world talk about not too high, not too low, and they say, the nationals is just another tournament. In many ways it is, but you can say that and it makes sense because it is. But the reality is most athletes, regardless of how good they are, have a very difficult time finding that consistency, for a tournament or throughout the year, et cetera. I think I was very fortunate to kind of train my body and my mind not to get too high or not to get too low, and be able to, be very consistent in those moments. I mean, you look at my career, even, making a national team as a junior in college and kind of being on the scene and being kind of that number 2 guy behind Williams pretty consistently for 4 or 5 years. There's a lot of consistency that goes with that. So again, to answer your question, I think I was just trained to be able to take a deep breath, understand that this is a journey, and embrace each day at a time.
I like that. And there's a lot of kind of a relief to that because you don't feel so overwhelmed to take it all on at once. And so there's something soothing about that. Now, I grew up in Illinois. The Williams family is legendary here. Steve, TJ, Joe Williams, obviously 10 state titles between 3 brothers. They went to Iowa. I was there in 2004 at Indianapolis at the trials. My mom drove me out there. I was in middle school. Talk about a little bit, just like, what was it like trying to solve the puzzle that is Joe Williams? Because I think a lot of guys now just forget how good some of these guys were, like a Lincoln McIlravy or a Joe Williams, kind of back in your time.
Oh, man. And it is amazing to, because you look at these beasts. I mean, just straight beasts. And I coached David Taylor, and I recruited Kyle Snyder, and I coached against Jordan Burroughs, and they are amazing. I watched Kyle Dake, and I'm just like, this kid's a freak. I watched Yanni, and I'm like, what is going on? And it's just, they're like, like aliens. But, at the end of the day, you look back and you look at like a Lincoln McIlravy and a Joe Williams and some of those guys, they were kind of aliens back then in their own right. I mean, Joe Williams, you talk about solving a puzzle. I've actually had this on my mind. I probably will do it at some point. I don't know how many matches Joe Williams lost in his prime that weren't like a clinch or overtime position. Because when he lost, with the exception, I want to say, was at the 2004 trials when he lost to Dolph. Joe Williams was so dominant in the U.S., and he only lost a handful of times, overseas. And when he did, I believe the majority of those was because, overtime or clinch. The only knock on Joe Williams, who I never beat, is that sometimes he didn't open up enough. Mm-hmm. And when he lost, like I said, it's a clinch position. That, you want to talk about solving a puzzle. That guy was, not only was he athletic and strong and arguably the best double ever, he was big. He was 200 some plus pounds down at 163.
No,
that guy was the most talented wrestler I ever wrestled.
Man, I didn't know if you look at the guy, he was huge.
Straight beast.
Huge.
Yeah, he's a straight beast.
Did he?
So it was a
ever
puzzle
beat
none of us
Satia?
could solve in his prime. Did he?
Yeah.
I don't know how many times he wrestled Satia, but I don't think so. I know Slay beat Satia. I don't know how many times Joe wrestled Satia, but I don't know if he beat Satia.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's just a guy you don't hear much about anymore, but I can't let people forget. And obviously, you're one of those people as well. And so, 2007, you make the team. You get 5th in the Worlds, and then a week later, one of the most interesting stories and kind of freak things happens that I've ever heard of in my life. You have a heart attack, and lo and behold, you've had a heart disease for most of your competitive career, and we're competing, as the doctor said, kind of on like a broken V6 against guys who had V8s. So, like, take us back to like Azerbaijan. And then like the week after, what the heck happened there?
Well, I mean, this is where some of these stories, if you're a wrestling fan and you remember kind of the mid 2000s there, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, all of that kind of era. It was a crazy story. And, I've been joking with Flo. I'm like, listen, guys, you got to get this out there because Terry Brands and Kevin Jackson and the entire world team. I mean, we got in an argument one time at a world team meeting, me and Kerry McCoy, because he said I wasn't responding enough at practice. And I said, I turned around and I kind of raised my voice. I got a little fired up. I'm a grown man. I'm 29 years old. I know I'm one of the best athletes in the world. I said, listen, this was Kerry. I said, listen, Kerry, I said, my body does not respond like some of these guys in here. But when the whistle blows, am I ready to go? And they're like, yes, but we want you to respond a little bit more during practice. And so I got where they were coming from, but I also know that they couldn't feel my body, because what I would do is I would always, in between like goes, I would hunch over, kind of be on my knee on the mat. And that's how I would breathe best. Well, long story short, I went into sudden cardiac arrest 5 days after the World Championships. And yeah, I was born with a rare heart condition that no one had ever, I didn't know about it. So these dudes were watching me literally grind out my last few days of wrestling and running up the Cog and Pikes Peak and all that type of stuff. And my heart, it was struggling. And that's it was kind of in its prime that week or two before the World Championships, where my body was not oxygenating itself at an all-time high. And I was exhausted a lot. No matter how much rest I took or no matter how hard I worked, I was fighting a physiological enemy.
Did you ever have any kind of suspicions deep down inside leading up to 2007 that something wasn't right just because of how hard you were being taxed to recover? Or are you just used to it at that point?
No, zero. It just, you don't know what you don't know. So I knew how hard I worked. So sometimes, Coach Douglas would be like, Heskett, you got to work harder. And I'm like, Coach, I don't know how much harder a human being has to work. Right. And so no one knew because they weren't seeing me all the time. So no, I had no clue, but I will tell you, one time at Colorado Springs, it was one of the good days. With my heart condition, my body didn't oxygenate itself very well. So I would always have a hard time recovering, and my arms would feel heavy. My legs would feel heavy, but it was never to the point where I stopped ever.
Mm-hmm.
With that being said, one time at Colorado Springs, we did like a 4-mile run, and I was always an average runner, but for whatever reason, this day, I just didn't get tired. I mean, I beat all the really good runners by like minutes on this like 45-minute run. And I got back and I was like, what is going on? Let's wrestle. Like I felt like the Energizer Bunny, and I always look back on that. I do. I look back on that and I'm wondering, is that what I would have felt like if I was actually optimized? Right. And I'll never know. But I did my thing. I don't have any regrets or any excuses. You read the stat that I lost 8 of my 9 matches in overtime, and that's what it is. But I fought through. I learned a lot about myself, and I think a lot of people look back on that. Some of the world team coaches and world team members are like, I mean, I still have my coaches to this day go, Heskett, I'm glad we didn't kill you, bro. So I'm glad too.
Seriously,
but it was
though.
crazy. No, like literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is you're a professional athlete, top 5, top 10 in the world, not to mention the U.S. for a decade, and you had essentially, you did have a heart defect, and so it's amazing to see what would have happened without. But at the same time, I don't think so, because all of that led to you to where you're at now and kind of the leadership you're doing now. And so, talk us through. You have the heart attack. I read something like it was like 230 beats per minute. You're at the hospital. What are you thinking like the week after this happens? Are you grateful to be alive, or are you sad that you can't wrestle in the 2008 Olympics? Or is it a little bit of both?
Well, no, there's no question. It's a little bit of both. What really happened was I was in denial. Okay. I didn't believe that my career was going to be done. And I believed that I was going to be the Olympian in 2008. So with that being said, I mean, I remember when the doctor and I kind of, the reality came, Joe, your wrestling career is over. And that was the 5th day in the hospital when I found out that news. And I was like, whatever. Now, when I can't say all athletes because I can't, speak for all, especially elite athletes. But when you train as hard as we train, there's a stubbornness that comes along with that. And I absolutely believed I was going to be the guy in 2-8 and overcome a heart defect. So they actually, on a probably 6th day in the hospital, they put in the defibrillator into my chest. And I was like, listen, I'm going to win an Olympic gold with a defibrillator in my chest. And at this point, it's only 10 days after the World Championship. So I just placed 5th in the world, losing to the world champ in the last 10 seconds. So when my heart condition happened, it was a mix of feelings. I knew I had some hurdles to overcome, but I also believed I was going to be the guy. The reality of the situation was my heart wasn't going to allow me to be the guy. I had to find that out the hard way. But I did embrace, and I'm a man of faith. After a very short time, I did embrace the fact that my career was going to be over, and I had to recalibrate my goals.
And here you are now, one of the top minds in sport in terms of leadership and personal development. After your stint at the Army, at West Point. And I know you were at Cal Poly before that. You were at Ohio State after that. Then you got to West Point. Then you go to West Virginia and take this role, which I thought was really unique because I've heard you say that your goal is always to become an AD at a D1 program. You're at West Virginia for 3 years, but at the same time, are you kind of plotting in your mind, this is all kind of leading up to you doing your own business and your own thing?
No, I was not at all thinking that, actually. I mean, I thought it would be cool to do my own thing one day, but I was on the absolute 100% kind of vision, and I was committed to the AD route. And so, some circumstances happened, and I was really disappointed with what I saw in the inner workings of college athletics. I loved my time at West Virginia, but college athletics, it's too bureaucratic, and it's not about the athlete. It's not about the athlete. It's about business. And I love business, but not at the expense of people. And so I kind of have a little bit of a gripe, and I think there's some great leaders out there. There's some obviously great ADs, but if we don't make college athletics a people-first business, which is going to be very difficult to have happen, we're always going to come up short in helping these young men and women really achieve their potential and their long-term goals outside of sport.
What's it like though on the inner workings of like a top D1 program like that? And like, you don't have to give specifics, but what do you mean by that and how ugly it is or how much of a business it is? Like, what did it look like for you and what really jumped out?
Well, I mean, a lot of things jumped out. The student athlete's not a priority. It's all about, it's all about revenue. It's about making money. It's about, and it's not just, it wasn't, I was in a senior level role for 3 years. So I was able to, travel the country and talk to other ADs. I mean, that's what I do, associate ADs and, look at different programs and, you're at these conferences and you're hearing similar stories of what's going on. And, you got these major programs raking in multi-million dollars a year, and they don't have any type of real structure in place for student athlete support. I mean, yes, they may say, oh, we have a health institute on campus, but there's nothing internal that's really designed for leadership and life skill development or mental health, just mental health support and some of these things. Again, there's resources on campus, but if you're making these millions and millions of dollars, you're telling me that you can't create a stronger internal model to really be able to take care of your student athletes. And then what it would come down to is a lot of these programs is like, we don't have the money. But the contradiction, the paradox is then the coaches on, the football staff would get, $1 million raises. And again, I'm not talking about one specific school. I'm talking about this is the kind of the model across college sports. So it really comes down, Ryan, to prioritization. Student athletes are not a priority. I'm a guy that really, it bothered me. And I knew that unless I was the AD, I was going to have a hard time to be that agent of change that I wanted to be. And I got to the point in my career that I didn't want to run around the country anymore, going job for job. I wanted to really focus on my children, and I was able to kind of fall into a great situation with the mentorship that I had with kind of corporate leadership and my own leadership model. And through a few years of grinding, I was able to create the Introspective Leader Education Series, which is my own proprietary leadership model. And I spend a ton of time with my kids, and I try to help people as much as I possibly can, both in sport, in business, and in life. And
if we were in one of your seminars now, what are some core tenets that you always hit on if you're talking to a group of folks?
Well, I'll tell you this right now. There's four. I call it the 4 domains of effective leadership because it's all about effective leadership. And that's what I break down specifically, because leadership can be good or bad. It can be positive or destructive. And so we have people in leadership positions, but that certainly does not mean they're good leaders. And we see that across all industry. So whether it's my leadership model, whether I'm working with businesses or I do this with my own athletes, there's 4 domains of effective leadership. The first is understanding, and we have to raise our understanding in whatever we do if we want to have, if we want to be excel or be effective at what we do. We have to raise our understanding, and there's ways to do that through knowledge and intellect, and some different ways of raising our understanding. The second domain is decisions. We have to learn how to not only make effective decisions, but we got to manage those decisions. And a lot of that comes down to communication and delegation, which people struggle with. The third element of this is belief. And there's a concept called self-efficacy, which is our belief in ourselves. It's domain-specific belief. And so we break down belief, and I'll use a quick wrestling example. Somebody may have a lot of belief on the mat, right? And on the top position, but they may have very, very low belief on neutral. Mm-hmm. So their self-efficacy is all these different domains that we have to break down. And the final aspect of my leadership model is execution. So when you really focus on understanding, decision, belief, at the end of the day, if we can raise all those and raise our knowledge in all those areas continually, because you can't get enough knowledge, you will have higher chances of executing and being more consistent with executing and being more consistent at building teams to execute. And that's what we break down. And here's the thing. We break it down with each individual. That's why it's called the Introspective Leader Education Series, because it's all about us getting to know us better. And, I feel like if there's a guy that can challenge people to do that, especially if they're up for the challenge, it's a guy like me who's coached his whole life and understands leadership at a pretty high level.
No question about it. And there's 2 things there that really jump out to me. One is the understanding, not so much like technique and rules and the game, but understanding yourself. And you're big on self-reflection. And there's no sport like wrestling that brings it up, because so many times after a tough match, you're left with yourself and your own thoughts. And so is that a big part of it, like understanding yourself versus understanding kind of the landscape that you're in?
Well, without question. And again, not to get too deep in the leadership model, but I have 3 brands of knowledge: ignorance, procedural knowledge, and declarative knowledge. And declarative knowledge is basically that knowledge, that someone may have that is basically the highest level of knowledge, that they have a great clarity on what they're doing and how to navigate whatever domain that is, right? Well, I don't care how high your declarative knowledge is, you can't have enough of it. So when it comes to understanding, it's all about raising that. So I'll use wrestling. We got a wrestling audience. My philosophy with H Wrestling, which is the other thing I do, is I have a wrestling developmental system. The tagline of it is understand the sport. So it's all about ourselves. So in wrestling, why are you a right leg lead? Why are you a left leg lead? How are you using your hands? What is balance to you? How do you increase your balance? Where are the positioning points? How do we increase our leverage? We break that down. I have a 9-year-old son, Ryan. He is actually really taken on to the sport of wrestling in the last 4 or 5 months. He has not wrestled. He's been around the sport his whole life. He has not wrestled in a tournament yet. He's not ready. He doesn't understand. He doesn't understand the point scoring. He doesn't understand. So again, this is just an example using wrestling, but we can use any other domain or industry where we break down who we are, what we're about, and the details to get us to that next level.
Oh, I love it. And I love the notion of clarity of purpose. There's Urban Meyer was big on that. I know who's, obviously was at Ohio State, but clarity of purpose is huge. And you think about your son who's 9, he's never wrestled a match. He's getting clarity of purpose on why he does certain things. And I just don't think you can talk enough about that, especially when you see youth clubs now throwing kids in tournaments at the 8 and under division, and their parents are acting like maniacs out there. My brother and I used to run a freestyle club, and we saw plenty of it. I'm sure you've seen it to a whole nother degree. How do parents take your philosophy on that? Is there resistance?
Oh, great. No, I mean, they love it. I think the problem is, and I've just been talking to some friends, and if anybody out there in the audience is listening, it's the key for me now is to take it to another level, right? And package it in a way, because this all comes from a very, very sincere place. And what we're doing is we're hurting these kids. We're hurting our sport. And it doesn't remain specifically in the sport of wrestling. These parents have to understand, and I kind of said it earlier, it's not their journey. Our job as parents is to love, support, and let these kids find themselves through sport. So my parents embrace it a ton. Now, I don't tell them what to do, but I do share examples. I have no clue if my son's going to be a good wrestler or not. I know that he has some pretty good skills and he's athletic, but at what level, will he wrestle? Will he want to wrestle in 3 years? I have no clue, nor do I care. What I care about is that he's having fun and he's developing and he's learning the work ethic that's associated with a sport like wrestling, which is a very individual one-on-one sport. So with these parents, my advice would be is to help your son or daughter understand themselves through sport. So we have to guide them, and there's specific strategies to do that. Otherwise, if you're that crazy maniac parent, and some of these parents out there, and I have friends that are that way, and I have to talk to them and pull them aside and be like, listen, bro, you're not helping them. And they're like, you know what, you're right. And we grow because they don't want, at the end of the day, parents don't want to hurt their kids. They just get so involved and wrapped up and they're not quite sure how to navigate it. So I get a lot of positive feedback by my philosophies, but they're not rocket science. Almost everybody would agree with them in theory, but it's the practice, it's the execution that a lot of these parents have a hard time doing.
Man, so how do we take that and make you like USA Wrestling's kids club facilitator for the whole country? It's like the scale is what's the hard thing. Whenever I talk to someone like you or I bring up the Andy Rovat example again because he has a real solid sense of like the fundamentals and how to apply them based on his time in Russia. So like, how are you thinking about applying that at scale across USA Wrestling? Or is that the challenge you're kind of working on?
Well, I think part of it is just, everything's timing, right? I'm not a guy that, I try to take small bites out of the apple. So, I've had conversations with USA Wrestling here and there, but at the end of the day, it's timing. There's just different ways to do it right. And sometimes we don't know exactly what those ways are to be the most effective we can be, whether it's some type of technology, whether it's some type of, platform or social media. In order to do it right, it has to be set up correctly. And I think that's the challenge. We have so many great ideas out there, but again, I go back to my own model and the execution portion, and so a lot of things aren't executed very well. My goal is to figure out, how we can just positively impact more lives on a massive scale, not just, in Joe Heskett's little bubble or whomever's little bubble. How do we get on the same page and really make a universal impact?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that right now. It's a teamwork thing, and I'm a teamwork guy, but I'm sure that, over time, as long as I'm breathing, I'm going to be working towards that positive impact.
Well, and it's like, to your point, let's not forget about the execution, because in your area and the people you're touching, like that's making an impact. And if we started going too macro, maybe then it would start losing its efficacy. So I love that you're just super focused in on the execution of what you're doing now. So as we kind of wind down here, so you're doing H leadership and then H wrestling. Is that kind of like a wrestling academy, like The Edge or something like that, or what?
No, my model is just a little bit different. Because I'm so focused on personal development. Everything I do, for the most part, is small group instruction. I may do with H specifically, I may have a kids group that's 14, 16 kids, but I don't really go much over that. Everything's small group, 4 to 6 athletes, and we don't do a ton of live. I'm not a traditional club. We meet once a week. They go to their own clubs. But what we do is we break down the sport in great detail and we raise their understanding. And Ryan, I've been at this a long time. I get so many aha moments, even from some really, really good athletes, even, at the college level and international level, because they're not, some of them are just really good wrestlers, but they're not even understanding what they're doing. Not in a way that they can articulate it and build off of it. So that's really my model and my system. I'm a small group guy. I'm all about refinement. I'm all about details. And so I'm not a traditional club model.
I think that's what makes it unique and probably more effective. Now, just 3 quick questions as we wind down. And the last one is always, how did wrestling change your life? So that's kind of a giveaway. But the first one for me is, you're obviously a very studious guy. Are there any books or people you follow that really jump out to you in the leadership and development realm?
I'm not really a big social media guy, so I don't do a whole lot of following, and I just have my own kind of personal mentors. And one of my great mentors is somebody that that, leadership mentors is somebody that no one's really ever heard of, probably in the wrestling world. But his name's Peter Demarco. He has a company called Priority Thinking, PriorityThinking.com. But this is a guy that he's a former West Point grad, has been doing leadership for, his own leadership company for, almost 30 years. But that's, it's guys like that. Sometimes it's the humble ones and the ones you don't know of that are the most effective. And so that's a great mentor. And I have other, incredible mentors that have helped me, and I've sat down and I've talked leadership with them, and they're very successful people. But that's one of the great ways to go, is just to ask a bunch of questions. And when it comes to books, I'm always, I really am a big fan of Good to Great. It was one of the first books that really got me thinking about things. And, so those are kind of in that area. I wrapped that up with a bow with those two things.
I've heard a lot of people recommend that. I've never pulled the trigger on it. Good to Great, but this might be the final push, man. There's so many good books out there, but maybe this is the final push to get me over the hump there. I do enjoy reading. And the one thing you hit on too is, man, having personal mentors, it's kind of a weird thing to say to people who aren't kind of in this space, but man, it's so important, because we all know that we just go that much harder when there's someone else we're trying to not achieve our goals for, but when there's someone else tracking us. I don't know what it is. It's kind of a weird thing about psychology, but we all know it's certainly true.
No, absolutely.
And then last question is, if you had to look at your life and the sport, how would you say that wrestling has changed or impacted your life and set you up kind of be the person you are now?
I mean, it's everything. I mean, it really is. It's molded me. I can't imagine the sport, myself without the sport. It's given me guidance. It's given me discipline. It's given me great relationships. Every aspect of my life ties back into the sport of wrestling. Every aspect, my children, my relationships, my education. So wrestling has been an incredible part to my whole. And I couldn't be more grateful for the sport. And it's one of the reasons why I want to see it continue to grow and it positively impact lives. And I'm telling you, if we do not put on our kiddie gloves with these youth, we're going to have a much higher burnout rate than's necessary, because this sport is not easy. And so ensuring that these kids are having fun and ensuring that parents understand how to navigate that fun sequence, that's going to be a game changer for the success of our sport. Because the success of our sport isn't just about the wins and losses. Most of these kids aren't going to get to the state championships or national NCAA tournament or Olympic games. So we really have to look at the whole and understand, what are we doing to ensure that these kids are having a great experience within our sport. And I think that's one of my goals moving forward.
Powerful, Joe Heskett, man. I get excited talking to you, and I just hope this is the beginning of a friendship here, man, because you are an outstanding guy, and I think just your mindset is so unique on the sport that we need more folks like you. So I really appreciate your time today, sir, and wish you nothing but the best.
So I appreciate you, Ryan. Thanks a lot for the call, and great job with what you do.
That's the end of this episode, but definitely not the end of the show. For more episodes, please go to wrestlingchangemylife.org. Subscribe to us on iTunes. Give us a star rating. Show the love, baby. Show the love. Thank you so much. We'll see you again soon. Peace.